Hey folks, welcome back. So we're picking up where we left off from last week, which is that we're trying to remove the paint from the inside of these window frames, and it's proving to be a little bit tricky because we've got sort of a trim of sorts in there, so it's not just flat, it's got a little bit of wave to it. So it's proving to be a little bit difficult to remove the paint from those surfaces. Now what we started experimenting last week is this stuff right back there, which is a paint removing gel, which you brush onto your surface, you let it set for anywhere from 30 minutes up to 24 hours, and then you kind of come through and scrape it off. Now it's working pretty well. I did a couple coats on the center section here, and then I did one coat of it around the outside of it just to kind of test it a little bit, and we cleaned off as much as we could when we left on Saturday. There was still a little bit left on there, so today I'm going to see how well the rest of this comes off. It's been couple days now since that was on there, and one thing that I brought with me to see if it works is I emptied out my savings account and brought some change with me here today. So this will give us some round metal objects that might fit into these grooves a little bit better to scrape the paint out. I don't know if it'll work, but let's give it a try. Alright, well that worked pretty well. Like I said, there's only one part of this one frame here that I had done twice, so I'm going to go ahead and put another coat of it around on the rest of it. The center part where I put it a couple times is pretty well cleaned up. I think at this point I can just come back with a little bit of sandpaper and what's left is just going to clean up just fine. So I've already brought over another frame right over here, so we're going to put a second coat on the first one, which is over here, and then put our first coat on this one and then let them set for a little while. Alright, so while we wait on the paint remover to do its thing, we've got like a half an hour to an hour to work on some other stuff. I want to try doing some cleanup down here kind of in the main area underneath the mill house. Now the main thing that's taking up space over here, of course, is our scrap pile. And most of this stuff is just scraps from doing the mill here. A lot of it's from when we were doing siding, just kind of odds and ends of stuff. And I was keeping it under here because earlier this year when we had this little stove going, so I'd have something to warm up by, this was keeping some of the stuff drier-ish, so it would burn better in the wood stove. But with it being middle of summer now, we don't really need it under here anymore. Now, I have had a couple questions about what's up with this stuff, and we got a really big pile of stuff out there. Some people say you really ought to get that burnt up so it's not attracting animals, and that's a very good point. But what I'm hoping to do with that is to get all of this stuff and the stuff out there, cut the length so that it will work as firewood for the stove, because I'm hoping to have this stove moved right up in there for this winter, so we'll be able to heat the loft area of the mill house if I want to be doing some work up in there. And probably what I'll do is I'll just put a big long stack of firewood right along this wall here, so it'll be out of the weather, staying a little bit drier and fairly easily accessible. Alright, well, it's been about an hour since we put this on here, so let's grab our loose change here and see if we can't scrape off some of this paint. Alright, well, this one right here is pretty well done, so we're going to set this off to the side, let it kind of dry out, and I think what's left we're going to be able to just touch up with sandpaper and get it cleaned up the rest of the way. Now if you're hearing a little bit of background noise, it's raining outside, and rain on a metal roof kind of tends to make a little bit of noise, so I will do my best to talk over that. I'm actually pretty impressed with how well it worked to use the coins. The dime was working the best. It happened to be kind of about the right diameter, radius, whatever you want to say, to get right in there and scrape the paint out, and it did a pretty good job. Now I am going to put a second coat on this one over here because that was only the first time that we put any of it on there, and then we'll grab another frame to put where this one's setting and get a first coat going on that one. Alright, time to switch gears and come back up here and try scraping some more of this paint off. Alright, well, we're getting it cleaned up slow but sure. We got all this stuff mostly moved out of here. There's a bunch of sawdust right around in here that's, I think it's just kind of blown from here, and then it just got mixed in with all the wood that was over here. So we're gonna need to hook up the bucket and just kind of clean all this out. And then we've got a whole bunch right over here as well that we need to scoop out of there. And I want to get it somewhat cleaned up in here before we start making a mess out of it again when we start milling the logs for the deck boards for the bridge. But you know, it's kind of nice to get it cleaned up at least somewhat in between projects. Alright, so for today I've got a couple things that I want to do with the sawmill. We are way overdue for an oil change on that, so I want to drain the oil in the mill, or in the engine on the mill. And at the same time, I've also been having some issues with the, I believe with the automatic compression release, or the ACR. And all that does is it's a mechanism inside of there that reduces the amount of effort it takes to turn the engine over at lower RPM. So in other words, it makes it easier to start. And then once the engine starts, it ups the compression to what it needs in order to run properly. So anyways, I think there's an issue with that. It's been starting really hard. I've checked through some other stuff and that doesn't seem to be the issue, so I think this is what it is. So while the oil is drained out, I want to pull off the crankcase cover and take a look in there and see if I can spot what the issue is. I've never done that before, so we'll see how that goes. And then of course also I left some of that paint stripper sitting on a couple of those window frames, so I want to go up into the loft and work on scraping that stuff off of there as well. Alrighty, well, I got as far as I could get with the engine, and I'm to the point that I need to pull, I think it's part of the clutch off from there that goes between the engine and the bandsaw blade, and I'm not entirely sure the best way to pull that thing, and I really don't want to do any damage to the engine, of course, because there's nothing worse than when you're trying to, you know, fix something on a whatever, and then you end up damaging another part of it, and then you got to fix that too. It's not fun. Not that I would have any prior experience of doing something like that, but you know, I'm assuming that it probably wouldn't be good. So anyways, I'm gonna do a little bit of looking into that tonight and see if I can figure out what the best way to pull that is, because I can't get the crankcase cover off until I get that clutch part off from the shaft. So anyways, as you can see, we are back up in the loft here, and I'm gonna work on scraping off some of that stuff off from our window frames that we put on last night when we were out here.